It's
Again, thanks
fixed.
for joining us. Dr. Maynard is joining us today to talk about a couple of papers that were published late last year by a research team in Italy led by Dr. Antonio Toniolo, who has been the recipient of a PHI research fund grant in the past. This was not related to that, but we thought these papers were significant in any respect. So I hope you were able to read the summary that Dr. Maynard wrote up, and he's going to make some general statements about that research in just a minute here, and then we will open it up for questions. Um, I think the easiest way to do this is if you have a question, just hit the raise hand feature, and we'll try to get to you in the order that you raise your hands. There is a Q&A button at the bottom too. If you're more comfortable just typing in your question, I will be monitoring that. And then we would just ask that you try to stay muted when you're not speaking, so we don't get a lot of extra noise and interference. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Maynard.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I can't say it's good to see you because I can't see everybody. There's too many people on the line, but it's good to have a good turnout for this. I suspected that there would be a lot of interest when people became aware of these two papers that were published in medical journals. And so, with the help of some of the other members on the board, and we did have some conversation with Dr. Toniolo himself. We tried to come up with a fairly, simple, not too lengthy or complicated summary of what his research group had done and what they felt that they had learned as a result of this, and tried to take out the pieces of it that were most relevant that we thought to our polio survivor membership of PHI. Um, I thought maybe what I would do would just be to go through briefly what was involved, summarize the main points, and then allow you lots of time to uh, bring up your questions in a way that we can expand on it and explain things in a greater detail as they're still not clear or that any of you feel is important or something you may want to add. Frankly, I'm a long-standing physical medicine rehabilitation doctor. I've been involved with this polio rehabilitation efforts and helping polio survivors with their lives for the last 50 years, I guess. It's going on 50 years already since the 1980s, I guess, for 45 years anyway. And but I'm not a virologist or an expert in this, and it certainly is an extremely complicated subject and one that it's hard to not be impressed that modern scientific medicine is really it's still in the frontier stages of learning how to really understand the complexities of the human immune system and what they mean for our lives, just as we all learned in the recent coronavirus, because viruses and other infectious agents still do exist, even though we like to pretend that they've been conquered. They evolve too, and so it's a constant learning job that you have to stay involved with. And I think the results of this paper really highlight that truth. So, in the first study, that I would also just like to add, Dr. Toniolo and his group, it really involved patients, Italian patients from two large rehab centers in northern Italy that have done some collaborative work over the last 20, 30 years. Uh, and Dr. Toniolo himself is a virology person, not a clinical person, but he really has done a great job of collaborating with his colleagues to enlist the support of them, and certainly the polio survivor community there and organizations in North Italy are to be credited and congratulated for their participation and assistance in making this study possible. What they did was locate almost 100, a little short of 100 polio survivors. I'm sure they had many more that didn't meet other criteria, but there were relatively straightforward polio survivor cases that their conditions were not highly complicated by a lot of other comorbid and other conditions that occur. So that they felt they were 96 subjects with post-polio syndrome that was significant and met the criteria of the European Federation of Neurological Societies, which is very close to the one we use in the States that a lot of us, including other members of PHI, were involved with, and the NIH were involved in writing up in the late 90s. And what they did was, of course, these people had to volunteer not only to go through the examinations, and probably most of them had because they were getting treated. Most of them were being treated at the rehab centers there for their post-polio syndrome symptoms in North Italy. But they of course gave blood samples, and several of them also provided tissue samples from because they were having other procedures done, like they were having a colonoscopy. Well, if they did, some of them were willing to volunteer to have an extra piece of tissue from their colonoscopy procedure that could be sent off for further analysis by the virology lab that Dr. Toniolo heads. So they had a variety of studies, incidental studies that were not part of the main study that was going on. The other thing was these polio survivors were all asked to find family members who were willing to participate. And their criteria was family members who had lived with the polio survivor for a minimum of 5 years. 2/3 of what ultimately were used as 57 family members that contributed blood samples that could undergo the same kind of analysis. About 2/3 of those were blood relatives, either siblings or parents that had, or I guess if some were even children that had lived with a polio survivor, but were direct blood relatives. About 1/3 of them were spouses, which is not perfect from the standpoint of science, but nevertheless, getting at the issue of potential ability to infect others was important. And then they had a variety of control groups that they used, and it was kind of interesting. Most of the normal, what we would consider were normal controls, were people who were blood donors because they were otherwise contributing, donating a unit of blood. And so all they had to do was give permission to have a small amount of that blood also used for analysis in this study of poliovirus genomes. Well, what is a poliovirus genome? Because the heart of the study was taking blood samples then from these 3 primary big groups of people, or fairly large groups of people, and finding out whether there were what's known as a viral genome. And a viral genome is essentially a piece of a virus. I mean, viruses don't live independently; they always have to have a host. And the genome is the piece of the virus when it's by itself. But they can, of course, reproduce. And we've known for a number of years, and some of the background on this study was way back in the 1990s, as early as the 1990s and even 1980s, perhaps. People started looking and investigating whether they could locate any evidence for live viruses in long-standing polio survivors, because they were concerned that it might be related to why some of the polio survivors were getting worse. from post-polio syndrome. And the now where was I going with it? It's subject gets so long. Um, so what they were looking for was whether what they found. They started looking and trying to recover them. Most they started with cerebrospinal fluid. And what they found, the only thing they could really locate definitely were fragments, what they called fragments of the genomes. If you think of a genome as similar, the important part of the genome in a virus, which is a good part of what the virus is made out of, is the DNA, the genetic material, so to speak. And that genome then of the virus was not intact, which would suggest that it probably wasn't reproducing or capable of reproducing. Uh, there have been some subsequent studies that were not very large and were more isolated and not designed to come up with a question to answer. That did suggest you could get genomes from a variety of human tissues. Subsequently, a lot of medical research has been done on other viral syndromes because virology has advanced a lot in the last 40 years. And they've shown now that a number of conditions people can have persistent viral infection long after what we recognize as the clinical symptoms associated with a certain virus are resolved. It's sort of a chronic low-grade viral infection that continues on. And because that's been shown in others, and Dr. Toniolo and some of the virology researchers were aware of that, but we're also very sensitive and aware of the problems that have been looked at about polio survivors and whether post-polio syndrome could have something to do with chronic low-grade viral infection. That's why they designed this study. Okay, let me get back to what the study involved. You take blood samples, and then in order to, you're basically now putting them in contact with what is called human cell cultures that are capable of growing in a petri dish. And you're adding that blood sample, and actually the blood sample is the spun down white blood cells, specifically a small part of the blood sample, not the red cells, not the serum, but the white blood cells. And then they spin those down and concentrate them, and then they expose them to these human cell cultures. And they're human cell cultures that were specifically established and grown that are vulnerable, susceptible to poliovirus. And so when they expose them, then that's possible for, if you have a viral genome or virus that's capable of reproducing itself, it can grow in that culture. It can attach to some of those cells and multiply. And so they did that. You have to, it's a very complex procedure that certainly is something innovative and was relatively new. That's what their lab gets the major credit for the study of what they came up with. And it is based on a lot of other very extensive virology background work. And so after they do this, they still have to do a concentration issue. That's what's called this. I think it was in the study in the abstract I wrote. We called it the reverse transcriptase PCR reaction, polymer chain reaction, and essentially that's like taking what you find from the possibility of the virus growing with these cell tissues to magnify them, because it gives them a chance to be duplicated artificially, not by actually growing, but by a replication process of the DNA. So you can have a very small amount of something and then amplify it to the point where it's much easier to investigate in the detail of exactly what it is and what it and learn more about what it might mean. So that's my best attempt at explaining a very complicated procedure that I frankly don't know myself because I've never done it. Um, but that's what the test really resolved. And so when they did this on these three groups of people, the bottom line was they did, in fact, show a marked difference between the polio survivors who met the criteria for post-polio syndrome. They found that a remarkably high, I would say, percentage, 87% of those people had these were positive for viral genomes, specifically poliovirus genomes in their red blood cells that could be located. And that compared with a much smaller amount. I think it was, well, it was 87, yeah, only 12% in the stable polio survivors. That's a pretty dramatic change. Now, granted, the numbers on a statistical basis you can challenge. They're not as impressive because for this type of complex procedure, only having 97 people in one group and 26 in the other group is not enormous from the standpoint of statistical reliability, but it's a very dramatic difference between the two. And when they looked at their family members, which was a group of 57, they only found two people out of the 57, or 12%, or I'm sorry, 3.5% of the family member group that showed these viral genomes. And then when they looked at their control groups, both the large group, which were age-matched blood donors, otherwise healthy, none of them showed these poliovirus genomes. And they also compared it with another group, a couple of other groups of people with other neurological syndromes that they otherwise had blood and availability to do similar studies. And again, they found none in any of these other groups. So it really was a fairly dramatic kind of a finding. And, you know, I very humbly look at it as when you publish something like that in the Journal of Neurology, I know that journal well enough to know that it has peer review people in the field that are directly involved with this. So there would have been other virology people not involved with the study who looked at those methods and would have felt that they were all scientifically valid enough to allow that study's result to be meaningful and allow it to be published in a reputable scientific journal. Now, a couple of other things that don't come out so easily. That's the major finding in that first study. Was that, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this seminar. We don't want people to be overly frightened by the fact that it looks like polio survivors with PS may well have a chronic infection still going on in their bodies. And we didn't want people to be frightened by that because there's a lot of other conditions where that may be true with other viruses. So it doesn't mean that they're infectious to others, which is one of the things they tried to show when they had people that were living close to them and that they didn't have a similar sort of thing. But that probably is explained because the numbers of these is so small that we have nobody been able to find them until they looked at it through these advanced newer techniques of finding viral genomes. That's one reason. The second is they look like they're mutated. And based on similar kinds of research with other viruses, that's not surprising that the ones that can manage to survive and set up housekeeping on a chronic basis, so to speak, in their host, which in these cases are the people who have survived the acute polio or acute other viral disease. Nevertheless, they're still, to some degree, living in their body someplace. It doesn't, we don't know what it means. It's not clear at all what it means. It's too new kind of a finding. In this case, it doesn't seem as if these mutated small amounts of this necessarily mean much. But on the other hand, his studies go on to show that there is some evidence that the inflammatory markers are higher in the people with post-polio syndrome that were identified in this study than the stable polio survivors or other family members in the control groups. So there could be that there's a low-grade degree of inflammation that's still going on as a result of this chronic infection. The other thing I wanted to add for people is that the infection, the study itself wasn't aimed at other tissues than white blood cells taken from blood samples, but they did, in these selective cases, look for the same type of viral genomes, poliovirus genomes, in these several smaller numbers of polio survivors who were able to provide intestinal tissue or cerebral spinal fluid because they had another condition that was being investigated. And so there was a reason for them to have a spinal tap. And so there was spinal fluid available and they could look at it. And what they showed was that they actually were able to recover the viral genome from those tissues in some of those patients. And again, those weren't in numbers that somebody can crow about it in a study because it isn't yet scientific. But it certainly does support the fact that, and it's not surprising when we understand how the poliovirus originally worked in the human body and why it led to disease. It did seem to set up housekeeping in the intestinal tissue primarily. And then later, through by remixed circulation through the body, it got into the cerebral, into the nervous system, central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, where it ultimately did the damage that most of us recognize as paralytic polio. So that's why I think this research is exciting, because I think it may well lead, hopefully it does lead to further study in these directions so that these things can become, better understood. Frankly, as a polio clinician, polio survivor treating clinician, it's not clear that these are going to lead to any remarkable new treatment, but it does offer hope that these newer antiviral treatments do make more and more sense. And as many of you may know, there has been a study that looked at immunoglobulin treatments for polio survivors that's been going on for almost 20 years in various stages. And there's a stage of it that is still going on with results not yet being released to the medical community that's not directly involved with the studies. So we're not sure how helpful those specific treatments are, but it does support the fact that antiviral treatments may well someday prove to be useful for polio survivors who may well have a low-grade degree of infection, or perhaps for polio survivors in the more acute stages of their earlier recoveries, or other viral diseases. So people are still looking at it. This study did do some secondary investigations on, and that's into the second study, which that's why we put it on as a companion. And it was called Post-Polio Syndrome with the Impact of Humoral Immune Deficiencies, Poliovirus Neutralizing Antibodies, and Vitamin D Deficiency. And the reason they did this related study was because those three big factors, if they're big categories of factors, your humoral immune, what we normally think of as gamma globulins and other immunoglobulins, are certainly one of the big defenses against viral infections, including against virus. Some of you remember, I even remember that before I went to medical school, but one of the treatments when you had acute polio was gamma globulin injections, So those have been around for a long time that people have been investigating. Poliovirus neutralizing antibodies are something newer, but again, there's something that the body can produce that helps fend off an acute poliovirus infection when it was beginning. And the vitamin D deficiency was chosen in the second study as a marker of nutritional factors because it's been known now for quite a while that your nutritional people in good nutritional state, whatever, however you want to define that, generally have a healthier, more robust, effective immune system to prevent them from getting sick from other viruses or other diseases than people who are in poor nutritional shape. And vitamin D is a useful marker. Other studies have supported that vitamin D is a very important. Your vitamin D levels are one of the more important nutritional markers of being in good condition for and having a healthy, likely to have a healthy immune system. So they again took a group of polio survivors that were volunteers to provide a variety of blood samples that could be used and compare, and then they analyzed them for generally those three types of things. And they did it because they were, we've known that for years. Did one family that, let's say you had a family of 10 kids, parents and 10 kids, and there was a polio epidemic going around in the community, and then in that one family where they're all living together, one person came down with paralytic polio and the rest of them didn't. We've known that for a long time and suspected what was there that was contributing to why that one person got it. Now, obviously, there's variations, or maybe one person got it less, one person got it more, some had it a little bit, but there's all these variations. And anyone with common sense would suggest that there was a variation in their immune system, but trying to understand what factors they were have escaped people until fairly recently. And the focus of Dr. Toniolo's research was try to shed more light on those factors from what you might learn from looking at polio survivors who are now 40, 50, 60 years after their polio infection. And interestingly, the bottom line on this study was there was suggestive evidence. Study wasn't set up to answer a question definitively, but the study did support the hypothesis that people that got paralytic polio are more likely than people who didn't get polio to have abnormalities in their immune system, especially in the IgG and some of the subtypes of IgG that were looked at in this, as well as in the IgAs, which, like I said, were more related to the intestinal receptors where you get more poliovirus when you're exposed to it, where it can set up persistent housekeeping, so to speak, in the intestinal lining, which is what usually has to happen before somebody comes down with what we more recognize as clinical acute polio and let alone paralytic polio. So the study did support that because they did find a number of significantly higher abnormalities in the polio survivor group than in the control groups that they used. And again, they had a number, and in the family groups. And it was interesting that for a number of criteria, some of the family groups some of the measures in the family group were like in between the normal control group and the polio survivor group, as if there were a genetic tendency toward mild gamma globulin or other immunodeficiencies, so to speak. So it was kind of exciting to realize that, and I hope again that it's used to support further research. Now, the one part of this study that may have some clinical relevance to polio survivors was the issue of vitamin D, because it did show that polio survivor sample, and this sample of them, were much more likely to be deficient in vitamin D, have lower vitamin D levels than are optimal than compared to the control groups, or as compared to even the family member groups. And those, if anyone goes to read the studies, Brian, I don't have my Maybe I have to go to that. I don't know if I can pull up my own, but oh, here, I guess but it's amplified if it's up. But
Hmm.
there is a page that shows that. Um, but it basically is showing that if you put it on a percentage basis, they had 39 polio survivors that underwent these blood studies. And where was it? I'm sorry. Yeah, 46% of the post polio syndrome survivor group were deficient in vitamin D levels. 36 were insufficient. That is to say, your levels are lower than is optimal, but they're not severe. And only that smaller 18% had normal vitamin D levels. That's pretty dramatic. And that compares for otherwise, hopefully, a relatively representative sample of normal people, age matched, in North Italy. Only 8% were deficient, and 10% were low in vitamin D, compared to 46 and 36% in the polio group. Family member numbers in between. Those are fairly significant numbers. You know, you're always going to find some people deficient in vitamin D in almost any group of people, including us in the U.S. But those are pretty dramatic, more than what you can expect. Now, they hypothesize there's a lot of things. Are polio survivors less likely to be out in the sun? They didn't control that all blood samples were done at the same time of year, because we know vitamin D levels are lower in the winter and spring, early spring, than they are, you know, in the midsummer and late and fall. But nevertheless, when you get differences of that degree, they're probably meaningful. And they again suggest that there may be intrinsic abnormalities in the risk factors for why polio survivors came down with polio in the first place, may relate to the way their body handles vitamin D and how it contributes to the system. That's clinically relevant because we know most polio survivors today are older, and therefore they're all in the high risk group for osteoporosis, osteopenia, and fractures and things like this. And so we have known for a long time we're trying to pay attention to how to keep their vitamin D levels up. So this study adds additional support for why polio survivors should know encourage their physicians to check their vitamin D levels. Those are fairly readily available in most clinics now, to get a vitamin D level drawn and make sure that yours is in the right range. And if not, work with the clinicians with the most effective ways of getting those in, because it isn't just so simple to eat vitamin D fortified food or take supplements. It can be a little trickier that and getting, and I'm not prepared to give a lecture on just that subject, but know that it does take the right types of vitamin D and how your body absorbs it. And some people absorb it much more readily than others. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop and take a breath while I give you a chance to enjoy. Brian can take some questions. What you'd like to hear more about.
Yeah, Francine has her hand up. Francine, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Um, when I heard Dr. I can never pronounce this right, his last name, Antonioli. Anyway,
Toniolo.
when I heard him speak
Yeah.
in St. Louis many years ago, he mentioned in this study that he had a belief that getting a polio vaccination might right some of the problem that he was anticipating seeing or he had already seen in polio survivors. And my question was, well, I have a couple of other comments too. My question was, among the people he tested, were they vaccinated after they had polio? Because I know that in the United States, the vaccination campaign did not exclude people who'd already had polio, and I had a whole series of shots after I had polio, which I think a lot of people did. And I don't know if that was true in Europe, if they vaccinated people that had already had polio. And and I tried to get tested here in the United States to see if I had the virus in my system. And the only blood test I could get was whether I had antibodies. And I knew I had antibodies because I'd had it and I'd had all the vaccinations. So that didn't provide any information at all. And the other thing, my other comment was when you said that the low amount of virus they did find tended to be in the intestines. To me, that made sense because it was an intestinal virus to begin with, wasn't it? Yeah. So anyway, that's it for me. And I just wondered about whether there was any differentiation made among polio survivors that had been vaccinated after they had the virus in their study.
Yeah, thanks for asking. That's a good question. Yeah, and it is discussed. I suspect what you might have heard Dr. Toniolo say way back at that conference. I was there too. It's probably changed, over time. But he does discuss the issue, and they did document the vaccine status of the people. One of the things in the studies they showed was that all the polio people had, in fact, all their control groups too, all had high levels of what's known as, let's see, I want to make sure I don't misspeak. These don't roll off my lips automatically, but the poliovirus neutralizing antibody. See, that's a reflection of whether you've had the vaccine. Will give you
right.
actual having the infection. But and what was interesting, he went on to comment that in North Italy, at the time, most of these people, in fact, I looked at that myself in detail this morning when I was reviewing some of the details of the study. And their sample of polio survivors all had their polio during the late 50s, between the about, I don't know, 44, 45 through 64 or 5, because Italy was a little later than the US in terms of when they got the full vaccine stuff in. But it was a fairly tight group of time period. And again, they mentioned that polio survivors, and they document only about 25% of the polio sample that they used, post-polio syndrome sample, had been vaccinated. Okay, their vaccination followed their acute polio because people recognized by the later 60s that you came down with one of the strains of virus, poliovirus 1, 2, or 3, ABC 1, 2, 3. And if you were infected with type 1, it didn't guarantee you were going to be couldn't still get infected with type 2 or type 3. That's why they still gave vaccine to some polio survivors, but they didn't do it to all of them, or some of them felt they didn't need it, and it was conflicting evidence. And so that's why not all of their polio sample had it, but some of them did.
Right. So what was his conclusion about whether getting another vaccination would help to prevent the progression of post-polio syndrome? Because he had mentioned that too. Did he say anything about that?
Really say anything directly about that, but I can read between the lines to say that no, I don't think it wasn't mentioned at all, because I don't think they felt it would. That's been considered as something to pursue, because the type of polio genome that they're finding that could be still smoldering around in these polio survivors and possibly relate to, and this study suggests it might be related to who gets post-polio syndrome versus stable polio survivors. It's unlikely to be active enough. You see, it's not an active enough virus to be responsive to the vaccines. Plus, it's too hard to know which one, and you're getting it. There's more worry the other way around, especially the live virus, because the one worry is if you are a polio survivor and you weren't, and let's say you weren't vaccinated, but you were around, and I think there's been some anecdotal reports about polio survivors being around, let's say, a grandchild who's been received. This was before the US about 8-10 years ago went to they're back to the Salk vaccine, which is inactivated. But when we were using the live virus Sabin vaccines, the sugar cube type of polio vaccine, and their grandchildren were getting that, that's capable of being shed by the person who gets that. And
Right. Yeah.
older polio survivor can go back, and some of them have had problems that had come in. I mean, there've been anecdotal stories, not well documented with any kind of scientific investigation, but enough to be concerned. And this paper suggested that same thing could be true, because if you were somebody who got polio because your immune system was off in the first place, then if you're exposed to this later, you still could come down with the vaccine related virus and then become a chronic shedder or having people use it. And they're finding that that was one of the issues. If you're an immunodeficient person,
Right.
not related
Well,
to being a polio survivor, but you're immunodeficient as a younger person, coming along, and then you get exposed to the vaccine, you can either get sick and get paralytic polio, or because it mutates, or you could become a chronic person who carries it around. So you're shedding this stuff all the time and don't even know it.
right.
So
Well,
they're
thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation. Appreciate it.
well enough to make recommendations from it, but we need to be alert to it. Thank you for asking that. That's good.
All right, let's kick it over to Mike.
Hi,
Which might here.
me.
Yeah.
Hi.
He'll get your
You and Dr. Maynard, you and Brian know that I'm a microbiologist and I'm a polio survivor, and I've been studying polio for almost 40
Oh,
years.
is that Mike Kosovo?
Yeah, Casso.
Oh, that's
Hello.
right. I recognize your voice.
Yeah. uh,
I was
cou-
wondering if you'd be on the call, so I'm glad to hear
yes,
you.
couple of things. And I've read every paper I think that was ever written anywhere, going back to Dukakis and everybody else on their, initial findings. And as a microbiologist, and everything that I've studied, I know that within a few days after getting the polio virus, the immune system starts to act. And I also know that in approximately 2 to 3 weeks after you get it, it's cleared from the bloodstream. Unless, again, you're immunodeficient. Then if it was something like that, then, but for most people, I also know that it's impossible for the polio virus to get into a red blood cell, because a red blood cell has to have a CD. Polio virus only attaches to CD155 receptor sites, which are on every cell in the body, but not on red blood cells.
Right,
And if the RNA genome got into a red blood cell, it couldn't replicate because the red blood cell has no nucleus,
right.
has no ribosomes. So I mean, I look at all of that, and
These were, if I said red cell, I was wrong. It's white cells.
oh,
These are all
oh,
Lucas. Sorry, I'm
okay.
focused.
I also know that it is shed in the feces for approximately 4 to 5 weeks, even after the virus has been neutralized in the bloodstream. But according to there was a research study done many years ago on so when they gave somebody the Sabin vaccine, and how long the polio viruses would remain inside of the body till it was cleared. It was an extensive study. I don't remember when now, and I can't bring it up. But they said after 90 days, there was no there was no polio virus anywhere in the body. Uh, I know about the talk that he gave at the conference, and I read a lot of stuff that he did, but at this particular point, for me, looking at it as not only as a polio survivor, but a microbiologist, I can't see how the genome can remain in the body, and I can't see how we could have any polio virus left in the body anywhere, even the genome, after all of this time. And between 20 years, remember, post-polio syndrome begins from 20 to 60 years after you've had polio. And I'm the perfect example of it, because I had non-paralytic polio as a kid, And like 40 years later or something like that, I came down with post-polio syndrome. And there's I can't relate having any polio virus in me that could have possibly caused
I agree, Mike. It's very hard to it is hard to reconcile. But I think that what I was impressed with, because that's why I got into this, reading some of this stuff fairly slowly. You know what I mean, to embrace it. But I'm impressed with how much they're finding that these low grade, what you might say were almost virtually asymptomatic, persistent virus living in bodies is happening with other viruses, not
yeah.
simply virus. And I think we just didn't have the techniques to identify it in the past. From a standpoint of relating to it, well, what does it mean? I was surprised. I'm a person who's had cold sores on my lips ever since I was a kid. And we didn't know that even when I was in medical school, sort of, as a young adult. But now we understand that, once you have that, that stuff lives there forever. I mean, it's dormant, so to speak. It's just waiting for something to trigger, and that's why you tend to get it once or twice every year, potentially for the rest of your life when things change. And I think it's a kind of a similar thing is what they're finding is that these polio virus genomes uh, can persist in some people and in more than one tissue. They're finding it in the white blood cells, in intestinal cells, and in subcerebral spinal fluid. So it's hard to ignore exactly what it means. I know you're going to say it doesn't make sense because people aren't sick or necessarily, but if it is enough to cause a low grade inflammatory, it's releasing cytokines and other inflammatory cells. They could be the things that are doing the damage. You see, it's not the virus itself.
Yeah, but that's another thing. Most people that have post-polio syndrome, probably by the time we got it, or at this particular point in aging, I mean, he must have. We're talking about. Look at us over here. We're in our 70s, 80s, or some, most of us, and we're not talking. I don't know what the age group that he did there, but most of us would have an inflammatory response for something going on in our body at the same time, particularly now.
Well, yeah, but these people were in they were older, like I say, because
I,
not old by American standards of polio survivors, but on the other hand, I think their average age was in the 60s. You
so
see,
they would have to have
well,
some
they all
type
had
of.
polio like I said, between 55 and 60. And the average age, almost all of them were either 6 months to like 3 years. They were all very young when they had their polio. So
Yeah.
I did a little quick math in my own head, and I realized they're all basically pretty much in their 60s. That sample that they used. Obviously, all of these studies, as any of us know, uh, uh, have to be replicated. They have to be duplicated with larger numbers. Of course, that goes without saying. But to me, this was more impressive than like Delacus' study back there. They had fragments of the stuff and this and that, and they were very inconsistent. There was no numbers to them. I kind of laughed that stuff off. You know what I mean? Who knows what a fragment means? This is more impressive. This is more like, and we're finding it when I find it's true in other types of viral diseases, it catches my
Yeah.
attention. Okay, that we're just
Yeah.
developing techniques now to realize this is going
Right.
on. We still don't really understand what it means.
Yeah, we need it. It's a start, which is very good. Now, hopefully, somebody will pick it up
Right.
and continue it with a larger group and a control group. And I'd like to see it done in the United States, where I could then all of a sudden turn around and say, "Well, that's the second group that did," or England, or another that has, and then turn around and say, "Okay, then all of a sudden we found something new." But
Thanks
for
for
now.
Brian. You got another question to move on?
Yeah, we can go to Maxine.
I'd like to understand from the study the difference between what they call polio survivors, and what was the other one?
Stable PPS.
Stable, right, right. I don't understand that because I have a lot of symptoms from having had polio, and yet those symptoms are stable. So I don't understand how those categories.
Sure. Uh, that's been a problem all along with a lot of the research, okay, in polio. Because how many are see what stable polio survivors are basically polio survivors, the way they used it in this study, and probably it's the only way that makes sense research wise. You can look at three groups of polio survivors. One is, and they all, and assume that they all have some residual. That is to say, they have leftover weakness in some of their muscle bodies, in parts of their body, in the neuromuscular function. One group meets the criteria that have been set up for post-polio syndrome. You can argue about the detail of those; they've been refined, but they're the best we have. They try to indicate the polio survivors who are getting worse. They're getting new symptoms, both neuromuscular symptoms and things that are probably related to neuromuscular symptoms getting worse, like swallowing and breathing problems, for example, and certainly the fatigability and those issues. Then you have a group of polio survivors who are stable from the standpoint, yes, they've had these longstanding weakness. They're still struggling with their arthritis. They're still trying to, and they're getting older and they're, so they got some other issues. So they're having more problems, but at the same token, their basic level of weakness in the muscles involved seems to be about the same as it was, or not enough different from what you might expect by being 40, 50 years older. Is different. That's what they mean by stable. And then you see there's these group of people, yeah, it's worse, but they've had accidents, they've had cancer, they've had horrible heart disease. Those people usually you don't put into a study, okay? They may or may not have post-polio syndrome, but you can't tell if they would have been a stable polio survivor had they not had that heart disease or their cancer or their other type of an issue. So generally, they're not put into a study. Okay. That's the best way I can explain it. Okay.
Thank you.
That help a little?
Yes.
Good.
Okay. Well, person I was going to call on, I think might have logged off. So let's go ahead and Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to see you again, Dr. Maynard. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done for our community for decades. You've made a real difference. I was diagnosed with post-polio syndrome in 1984. I got polio in 1952. And so I've been in the hands of the rehab community for a long time. And basically, done a lot of PT, done a lot to keep myself in good shape. And, not in terrible, I haven't had things like cancer and, I haven't had accidents that, injured, created a problem. Where I started to have a lot of trouble was when I was diagnosed with aplastic anemia 4 years ago, severe aplastic anemia. It's interesting that symptoms started, although I didn't realize it at the time, about a few months after I had the coronavirus vaccinations. My first clue was I had to have to deal with an ingrown toenail, and the doctor in dealing with it had trouble getting the bleeding to stop. And she said, "Are you on blood thinners?" Like, no. And I'm thinking to myself, why in the world is somebody asking me about whether I'm on blood thinners? Because, I don't have a heart issue. I don't have nothing. So, fast forward about 6 or 8 months after that, I had to have a blood test. I was getting weaker and weaker, finding it harder and harder. My energy was very low. And so I ended up going to my primary care physician. He ordered blood tests. He didn't know what to do. It's sort of like, we'll put you on a heart monitor, we'll do this, we'll do that. But then the blood test came back and he said, you need to get to the emergency now, not later, now, right now. And when the doctor calls you in the middle of the work afternoon personally calls you, not as secretary or as nurse, you're in trouble. And fortunately, I've been lucky enough to be. I live within a reasonable distance of Johns Hopkins, so I've been treated by Dr. Brodsky up there, and I'm now, transfusion independent. My question to you is, well, there are a couple. One is, has anybody seen any relationship between, people who've had the mRNA vaccine? Because I was a big rah-rah vaccine person, as you can imagine. If the vaccines had existed when I was an infant, I probably wouldn't have gotten paralytic polio, which got as far as my waist before the fever broke. But my doctors have all stay away from that, stay away from the boosters, stay away from anything that has to do with that mRNA vaccine, because they're not sure whether, that's clearly, now I'm on I'm on immunosuppressants, but the question that lingers in my mind, my question was triggered by your reference talking about the first study to mRNA in some form. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physician, I'm an actor. So it's a very different set of disciplines, but I've always been interested in science. I don't know whether anybody's seen anything, but I think it's worth. It hasn't been thought about. It should be thought about.
Yeah, I think I understand your concern. It makes sense to me though that would be very likely because the mRNA, it's a messenger mRNA. If I said RNA, I don't know why I did because it's just RNA, but they didn't. It's not related. But they were looking at wasn't really directly related to the. But they are RNA. I mean, it's a replication of an RNA, regular RNA that can be moved between cells. That's what the mRNA is. That's why they use that name. But that is those don't replicate themselves. So there's still another piece that might have to be missing. I know there's been a lot of concern about whether there's unexpected effects from the virus, those mRNA viruses because they've been new. We have not heard. I've not heard that. I don't think it's directly related to these studies from the immune system. They don't really. They're going to be using the immune system. There'd be no reason to expect that they would damage the immune system. The question I think is worrying about: could you have a reaction to them because they're still foreign to you? Something new is being put in. It's like being allergic to it, so to speak. Or you get an unusual reaction to it, and that's probably legitimate. But there's no reason to expect a polio survivor or the things that we've been talking about that may have contributed to why somebody came down with polio in the first place, or why they may still have a persistent thing going on, shouldn't have anything directly to do with your likelihood of having an unusual reaction to this foreign RNA that was being given to you. Instead of doing what it's supposed to do to boost your immune system in a good way, it does something bad. There would be, I can't think of a reason why they'd be related.
Right. Well, I wondered because, you did refer in the second study to abnormalities in the immune system among the people who actually were
For polio.
not paralytic polio, which I'm certainly, and no one else in my family did. I mean, that no one else in the family circle got it. Not that, yeah, I mean, I was the firstborn, so there were no other children in the household at the time. But it's just, and apparently statistically, because aplastic anemia is a pretty rare condition, but apparently those numbers have gone up statistically. The number of people who have been diagnosed with it have skyrocketed since the coronavirus vaccine, not among a polio. I mean, I'm the first polio patient Dr. Brodsky had.
But that's interesting. I didn't know that. But so that
Well,
seems
I
to,
don't think they're talking about it very much.
well, they may not be, but
It was interesting, though, to hear somebody who is one of the leaders in the world in treating aplastic anemia say the numbers have shot through the roof.
yeah, I know that is interesting. I hadn't heard that, but again,
Anyway, for what it's worth,
you're
it's a little thought, a little food for thought, yet another thing to worry about among us, us unicorns, if you will.
thanks for sharing that, Wendy. I hope your condition stays stable here.
Well, the main problem I have now is the fact that for 3.5 years, I have not had the energy to do my exercises. And so my body has deteriorated. My polio affected muscles have really, and just the thought of going back to physical therapy twice a week, my brain starts to short circuit. So I keep hoping I'm back to doing the arm exercises, some of them limited, but
Do what you can.
I knew it was coming. I knew what was going to happen, but it's okay. You do the best you can, right?
Right. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay.
Let's go to Dorothy next. She's been waiting patiently.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you. There you
Hi,
are.
Dr. Maynard. My question is, when I read this article, your article, I was highly interested because I've been going through actually white blood cell count low, and I highly relating to um, when that happens, of course, your immune system is lower. And throughout the last 20 some years, since I was diagnosed with PPS, I've gone through this. At the beginning, that's year 2000. Looking back, I wasn't diagnosed until 2004. But looking back, I know from 2000 on, PPS actually already happening. The weakening, not only physical, mental, and also from blood work. It was very low. And after diagnosed, continue another 6, 7 years. And during this time, easily get infected. I was very careful, but still easily. And I read this article thinking, could it be during that time still there's some low grade infection? And then gradually, however, after that, it slightly rising up, not to the normal level. But one of my doctor has said to me that I also read an article about it to say that East Asian, especially women, the white blood count usually is kind of a little lower, right below the 4,000, but maybe 38, something like that. So mine's hovering around there, and my doctor said this may be just you being the heritage. So we continue. And then I get another bad infection and it would drop. It will drop years. In 2003, I was contacted with COVID-19 and it wasn't bad to be intubated, but I tested positive for 6 weeks. And that of course brought up asthma. Asthma was also brought up by all those infections. I didn't have that when I was younger. Okay. And and finally, 4 months later, everything calmed down. But my white blood count dropped significantly low to 2.8. So my doctor was really alarmed and sent me to see hematologist. I've been working with a hematologist the last 2, 3 years, and he did all the tests. I did not think about the virus and the low grade. I just thought, oh, of course, low white blood count, you're vulnerable to virus, so I get it. And because I have asthma and all that things would last longer, and all generally I'm weaker with PPS, with everything. So then I also found why he was trying to search what happened to me. He did all the tests. There's no sign of cancer. There's no any indication of autoimmune. So what could have been, right? So he just said, maybe just you, just give time. But he, of course, also he was very concerned. So he keeps seeing me every 3 months. And every 3 months we test, sometimes seem like inching a little bit from 3.2, maybe 3.3. Good, okay, let's wait. And then it drop back down. So it's been like that. So still this moment, so I read article that there are other patients with COVID, they get leukopenia, neutropenia. So I said to the doctor, could this be? He said he read the article, he knew about it, but he still wasn't totally settled. He wants to know just whether there's something else, and also he wants to at least see me reach forward. So we're still in this stage. When I saw your paper, I thought, oh, this is another thing. I'm going to bring the paper to see him when I see him next month. And we're still in this. So my question is, have you encountered a patient having this kind of condition, white blood cell count chronically low? Or that have you encountered any research paper that relating to viral? And I agree what you say. It's not just our polio virus, but could be other virus. Yeah, because 2002, I had a flu, first time in my life. It was very bad. I was in bed 4 months. After that, my brain completely changed. I feel my brain was pushing my skull and pressed my doctor to give me MRI, couldn't tell anything. And I have my heart started to get me to emergency room 3 times. EKG doesn't say anything. And that's when I know, oh, okay, it's not just polio virus, but could be others. So you heard anything about this white blood cell thing?
We have not ever heard that about the white blood cell thing, no, as being related to post-polio or the chronic
Yeah.
virus. You did catch my attention a little bit when you were talking about the coronavirus, though, because I did read that some coronavirus patients, I was aware that they could end up with it in their heart, okay, where they would end up having heart failure problems. And now they're finding that, in fact, they find, again, low grade, these mutant kind of genome kind of issues are there in the heart from the coronavirus. You see, so I think, things like this can happen. It points to the fact that viruses do different things to different people. You know what I mean? There could be,
Yes, right.
and then
For
there's
sure.
an uncommon one, and you don't know what it's going to be. How this will relate to, I don't know. It could be that you have, you could postulate, but it's only postulation. It's hard to prove. Could you have
Yes.
polio in the first place because there were some mild immune abnormalities in your system, you see, and then all of a sudden you got this chronic thing, but your body took care of it till you're older. And then
Yes.
else goes wrong with and then you get another virus, and then that makes it worse. You know what I mean? They can certainly add up to be worse than an individual person.
Right.
And we can't say that on the basis of these studies, that they're not possible to know. It does, though. Your point does illustrate this. One of the things I would hope that somebody can follow up Dr. Toniolo's studies with is developing perhaps a simpler, more straightforward, more available, probably less expensive type of a method of
Yes.
finding out if you're a polio survivor who does have this type of thing. See, and the advantage of looking at it in the white blood cell that they did, because it's easy. We all give blood samples all the time for tests, okay? It's not like you have to stick one in your spine to get cerebral spinal fluid or clip a piece of tissue out of your intestine. And those are much more complicated. But to do a simple blood test, if they could make a quick, reliable method of finding out, are you a person who looks likely to have polio genomes that are recoverable in this method in your white blood cells? If you are, then you could go into a group that it would make sense that you might be more likely to receive a benefit from an antiviral, immune treatment, one of these newer treatments that people are developing, you see, because you've got a more specific something to point to rather than you're only post-polio syndrome getting worse, weaker, because there's so many things that can be contributing to that. It's hard to sort them out and be sure. So you don't have a good endpoint, you see. So that's why I'm somewhat excited about this, if somebody would follow it up with that next step, because then you could design these intravenous immunoglobulin treatments and make sure that you're only giving it and then comparing people who have stronger evidence that they are among the group that is having a chronic infection, low-grade chronic infection going on. And does that make any difference? Can you measure? Does that go away? Or can you suppress it in some way that you could measure? That would be, I think, where the future research is going to end up going.
Okay, that's all. I have a very simple, quick one about vitamin D. Yes, indeed, I was deficient and started to take supplement vitamin D, right? It brought up, and now it's above 50, so it's great. And how high can it go? I mean, the normal range goes up to 100. But do we want to go all the way high? No.
It depends on which test you're using for your vitamin D levels. The ones I know that, and the one he was using here is not the one because I've had my own level measured, and I've other studies I've read, but I was looking at the ones where, you want a level of around 30 is what's considered good, and some people think that really super healthy and they might get 40, 50. But you don't want to go much over 50. On the study, that's the kind of study I'm aware of, because you can't get too much vitamin D toxicity. It's possible, too much.
Okay. So 50 is good.
But that depends on the study. And see, I know at Toniolo's, when they were measuring vitamin D, they were using a different assay, so the numbers aren't the same. So
I see.
You have to go back to your reference of the laboratory that's involved and trust the doctor.
Okay. Thank you. I did hear the same thing from an infectious disease specialist, because last year I somehow in the yard got bitten by a flea or tick, and I got parvovirus and also what is the other kind? Another bacteria. Something Hensley. Okay, the brain's not working well. This is even worse than anything else. The brain fog. So anyway, I got two infections at the same time, and after months misdiagnosis and finally see an infectious disease doctor, and I mentioned about brain fog. He said vitamin D is good for that, and as high as you go. But I didn't dare to take that. So thank you for the answer.
Well, Brian, have we got rest time, a little time for one or two more, or that we should probably.
Yeah, if you're willing to, I don't have anywhere to be, so I know Ken's been waiting to
Let's
set his hand.
Yeah.
3:30.
Thank you, doctor, for being here. I have a quick question. I'm going to see my personal doctor tomorrow. Can I go in tomorrow and say, I'd like you to test me for a low-grade polio virus, or is
No,
there such a test existing?
he won't know that. He won't know what test you're talking about.
It's a she, but that's okay.
They need to develop that. Yeah, that's what from this paper. They had a method of doing it. It was a very long, complicated method. And I would also remind everybody on that just to keep us realistic. Okay. It's like one time we want to postulate of the future and get excited about where we want to go. The other is getting back to reality or where we are. To do this study that involved, what did we say, 87 polio survivors, 57 family members doing all these things. They did that over a period. I think it took them almost 10 to 15 years. I didn't see that reported exactly, but he was doing those studies, I know, back in around 2015. Well, they didn't finish this thing and publish it until just this last year. It's an enormous amount of work that went into this study over a period of many years to make this a practical thing that can be used on a clinical basis for like the kind of things you're bringing up. Somebody else has got to develop that test, prove its reliability, replicability, all those kind of things on a much greater level. We're not at that stage yet. What you can do is check things that we know affect your immune system, like trouble. If you have a lot of infections, like our other friend here a minute ago was saying, it might be looking at her gamma globulins across the board, getting more detailed profiles of her immune picture in general, making sure you're not only at your vitamin D levels, but some of the other important nutritional factors are up to snuff, okay, so to speak. Are they all optimal? Because you're vulnerable, so to speak. So at least make sure that everything to support or create or keep a healthy immune system, you're doing as many of those as you possibly can. And the doctor can look at, is there any other measures of your general immune system that he could look at? That he can do, but he can't do this specific kind of thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions?
One more burning question, otherwise we'll call it afternoon. Yeah.
Ryan, Christine had a question. Christine Neff.
Good.
Oh, okay. You can go ahead and just unmute yourself,
Hello,
Christina.
can you hear me?
Yes.
I have, for the last 5 years, gone to a functional medicine doctor. I don't know the difference. I have told my MD that I'm going to the functional medicine doctor and vice versa. The functional medicine doctor is always interested in what the MD has to say. The MD is never interested in what the functional medicine doctor has to say. But she has been actively testing blood, urine, and feces. And she's the one who told me I'm vitamin D deficient. She's the one who's been worried about my levels of various things. I'm kind of confused about all of this. Why wouldn't the MD be concerned?
Well, probably because he's being skeptical about the credentials of the person. See, there's somebody that's functional medicine. You need to know that there's no standard definition of what that means.
I see.
That they don't understand. I don't. I've heard people refer to that, but you have to say more about where's that person, what's their background, so to speak.
Right.
Nutritionist? Are they a chiropractor? Are they?
Yeah, this particular lady is a DO.
Okay, so he's a DO. All right. Well, that helps define it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's just functionalizing his practice or interest in the area of function.
Right.
Yeah. Well, all right, that's helpful because you have to know that. Then the other issue is if he said your vitamin D levels, if he used a reliable test, there's no reason not to, of course, pay attention to that and believe in it. Some, people vary a lot. I mean, these are all over the board like everything else. Any other group of people, some of them put more stock on nutrition and the ways that we have that measure nutrition as being reliable and important. Other ones don't. But I think vitamin D, there's a lot of very reliable measures of vitamin D that have been around for, I would estimate, at least 30, 25, 30, 40 years that are considered reliable. Some have improved or changed some, but so why they would be skeptical? Yeah, I would think he would want to know if it was your MD. Why would he not want to know what your vitamin D levels were?
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
Christina. Do you have time for more questions, Fred?
Was there one more? I was trying to.
Yeah, there's a couple hands
I didn't
raised still.
ask 30, but we got.
Eleanor Robbins here.
Yeah, go ahead, Eleanor.
Go ahead, Eleanor.
I thought what I learned from you was that post-polio was the death of a nerve sprout, which actually fits my leg. So I do a lot of walking, and about every 4 years, all of a sudden I get destabilized, and then I have to work back to get myself to be a stable walker again. And to me, what you had written made sense that it was some nerve sprout that died, and I have to like retrain or whatever. So is post polio something more than a death of a nerve sprout?
Well, the death of the nerve sprout is it's an anatomical explanation of what might be going on to cause a greater weakness. Post-polio syndrome, and that is what we define post-polio syndrome issue. What we're talking about today and some of these other issues is what's the reason that these things are declining, and there's many reasons. One of them being that there could be a continued inflammation because there's some kind of a continuing low-grade infection, and that's why these things are dropping off. I think you could still, and I would still go back to one of my older arguments, which was if you look at normal people, there's a certain drop off. We saw that in some of the original conferences with age. Okay, so all of us as we get older are losing some nerve cells. Okay, they do tend to drop off. Okay, and if you have bigger ones, because not because you had polio, but because you had, let's say, a pinched nerve that caused nerve damage and loss from a bad back issue, and so you were weak, and then you recovered. Well, part of your recovery from after they did the surgery and your back thing was, you still lost some nerve cells, and the ones that were left got bigger. If you follow those people, you see, very few people do, but if you ever do, and you follow that individual with that muscle that got stronger after he did his exercises and stuff, after the nerve, the compressed nerve and the damage was fixed with surgery. If you follow him 10 years later, 15 years later, he starts getting weaker again in that same muscle because his sprouts are damaged, falling off. Okay. So there's no immunology issue, except he's getting older. Well, maybe he also had anemia. I don't know. I mean, he got another disease, that put more inflammatory markings. Then they start dropping off quicker than they might have otherwise, because what is aging? Some people think that the majority of aging is an accumulation of other conditions and diseases that are abnormal, you see. And if you never get anything else, you just stay in optimal health, and you can live to be very old and very functional. And I can follow that reasoning, but it's kind of a chicken and egg argument. So what?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this has been great. I'm glad we had a chance to answer some questions, and I hope that if people have others and things come up, you can always write to us and at PHI. Brian will tell you about that.
Yeah, You can either shoot us an email directly if you still have questions to info@post-polio.org, or you can use the Ask the Doctor feature that's on our homepage and submit a question that way, and we will answer those questions for you. Again, I want to thank Dr. Maynard for lending us his time and expertise today. We really appreciate it. It was kind of I thought a fascinating discussion. You had some great questions, so I want to thank all of you today for coming prepared and asking some really great questions and having a nice discussion. Some people had asked if this webinar will be available later, and we will be uploading this to our YouTube channel fairly soon. So if you know someone who wanted to attend but missed it, or if you want to review it later or show it to your group, if you're a support group leader, it will be available in the near future. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Maynard.
Thank you.
And hopefully the weather's nice where you're at, and you can enjoy the rest of your day. But we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Summer is coming.
Okay.
Bye-bye.